installation and configuration of SQL Server for a data warehouse. So at this point, we've talked about the different types of disks, the disk subsystem, the different RAID levels, and where the files can and should live when we're installing SQL Server. Now it's actually time to do it. We're going to have in the real world the ability to install SQL Server with these capabilities that we've just discussed. And we also need to know the nuances involved with setting up remote access to that SQL Server. Because here's the thing, you're not going to be remoting into the actual server itself and then administering SQL Server or running your SSIS packages. There's a lot of tips and tricks to getting that going. So let's talk about these nuances for a second before we dive into the virtual lab and do it. First of all is the disk, which we've talked about. We know we're going to be setting up our data files on one disk, maybe our log on another disk, our temp DB on another disk, and of course backups on a different disk from that. That's going to be the obvious one that we're going to walk through the actual installation on. Now, it's going to be a quick installation. We're not going to go into all of the nitty-gritty details that come with installing SQL Server, because that's a several nugget topic, and that's actually covered in the 70-764 Administering SQL Server Certification exam, which you can check out here on CBT Nuggets. My man Garth Schultz does an amazing job of teaching that. The next one is the firewall. Since we're going to be not only connecting to the SQL Server engine, we're also going to be connecting to SSIS. We have a little bit of extra legwork to do. So for the engine, we're going to be running a regular default installation of SQL Server. So we have to open up port 1433 TCP in the Windows firewall. If we want this to be able to be browsed on the network, we also need to open port 1434 UDP in the firewall. And then to actually connect to this through SSIS, we also have to enable the firewall to connect to the program MSDTS-SVC. We're going to walk through that. I'm going to show you where that is and how we can get that going. But that is specifically for SSIS. Now, another crazy nuance with SSIS, whatever version of SQL Server you're running, you have to run the same version of SSMS. For instance, if we're installing SQL Server 2016, you have to install SSMS version 16. Don't go off thinking you're going to install the SSMS version 17, 18, or 19, and it's going to be able to connect to SSIS. It won't. You will spend a lot of hours trying to troubleshoot that, only to come back to the fact that you need SSMS 16 installed. Now, I've already gone ahead and installed SSMS 16 on our client NUG VM, but this is just for when you get into the real world. You need to know that. And lastly is access. While we can certainly control who can access the database within the database or the SQL Server instance itself, to connect to SSIS, you also have to be a local admin. So we're going to be bringing up one of my favorite tools that I like to jokingly call the Loser Manager, because it is abbreviated LUSRMGR. And we're going to be setting up the local admin privileges there. So let's fire up the virtual lab, get started. We've got a lot to cover in this nugget, and it's going to be really fun. Let's go! For this nugget, we are going to be starting with SQL NUG 2 in the virtual lab. So let's go ahead and click on the little password button to paste in our password, and let's click login, and we can get started. And we're logged in and up and running. We can go ahead and open the File Explorer here. We'll go a little bit full screen so it's a little bit easier to read. And on the C drive, I've placed a folder called Staging. That's where the installation file is that we're going to be using to install SQL Server. You can see right here this big long file that we've got here, SQL Server 2016 developer, blah, 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 blah. You can just right-click on that disk image file and click Mount, and it'll go ahead and mount the file for you, and it brings this up right here. Let's right-click on Setup and Run as Administrator. And the SQL Server installation box comes up, and if you've never done this before, you can see a ton of options here. Again, I'll refer you to the 70-762 certification exam and training here at CBT Nuggets, where you can get all of this info here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do this quickly, so let's hit Installation. And right here, we are doing a new SQL Server standalone installation because we're going to be installing our data warehouse here on SQL NUG 2. Let's give it a click, and it brings up the installation dialog. We're sticking with the Developer Edition for this. If you want to use the Developer Edition, you need to know that there are licensing implications for this. You cannot put Developer Edition in a production environment. Microsoft will find you, and you don't want that to happen. All right, let's go with Developer and hit Next. We agree to the licensing terms and hit Next. Global rules, it's going to check and make sure everything looks good. We're going to go ahead and just skip this and click Next. Product updates is fine. We'll click Next. Now, in the install rules section, it is warning you about the Windows firewall. We are going to address that after the installation is completed, like we specified earlier in this nugget. All right, let's click Next. Now, this part's important. We're doing the feature selection. We obviously want to have the database engine. Let's go ahead and do that. Just for grins, I'm going to turn on full text and semantic extractions, data quality services, analysis services. Let's scroll down here. This is obviously important. Integration services. We know we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. And just for fun, I'm also going to install the data quality client, and that should be good. Now, the first thing to notice right here, the instance root directory. This is the first decision we have to make about where we're actually going to install the binaries of SQL Server, the actual engine itself. Where is the compute running? This is going to be in the C drive on program files right there, and this is where I want to keep my binaries and SQL Server instance running. Let's click Next. Okay, this is where we can install the named or default instance. We're going to keep this as a default instance so that we can also simplify our firewall process and just keep it listening on 1433. Again, if you'd like to know more about this, hit up that other SQL Server course at Administering SQL Server. We'll go ahead and hit Next. In the server configuration dialog box, this is where we can change the service accounts that are running themselves, including, as you can see, this MSDTS service, the integration services service account, the agent service account, or the engine itself service account. These have major implications in your environment that you really need to know and plan out before you go forward with installing a SQL Server. You can change them after the fact. It's very easy, but it will cause you to restart the SQL Server instance. Let's go ahead and click Next. Okay, a lot going on here. The first is, how are we going to authenticate? Do we want to have Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication using the mixed mode, or just Windows authentication? I'm going to leave this on Windows authentication and choose to add the current user here as an administrator. I'm also going to add the other account that we're going to be used to connect remotely, just for simplicity's sake, CBT user. So to do that, I'm going to click Add. Right here and enter the object names. I'm going to type CBT user, check names, and OK. Data directories. Guess what? This is exactly what it sounds like it's doing. The data root directory. This is going to be the root installation for SQL Server, and the system directories. The user database directory, this is going to be the user data. These are going to be the databases that we create for either our applications, reporting, or just our storage. In this case, this is going to be the databases that we use for our data warehouse. Let's change this location because we know we don't want it to be on the same drive as everything else. Let's go ahead and put it in the E drive and make a new folder called Databases. We'll say OK. Oop, it just stayed at new folder. Let's change that real quick. Whoop. There we go. Databases. Okay, great. Now, the user database log directory, I want my transaction logs to be in a different location as well. Let's go ahead and go to the T-log drive. Click Make New Folder. We'll call this T-logs. And click on T-logs and say OK. And the backup directory, again, we know we want that to be in a different place as well. Let's go ahead and click on the H drive for backups, make new folder, BAKs, because the backup files themselves are a BAK file. Let's hit OK. TempDB. We know we want the TempDB to be in a different directory as well. So in the data directory section here, let's hit Add. We're going to go ahead and go down to the G drive where temp is. Let's make a new folder and call this tempdb. Click OK. And we'll go ahead and remove the C drive that we had in place now. The log for the tempdb is also going to be in the same place. We can move that to the T log if we so desire. Let's go ahead and click Next because we're ready to keep moving. This is for analysis services, which we're not too concerned about right now. Let's just get Add Current User and go ahead and keep on and going next through this. and we are ready to install. I'll go ahead and pause it while we let this install complete. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, you can see we've got nothing but green check marks. The installation is succeeded. Are we ready to use this thing yet? Nope. We still have a lot of work to do to still get it able to access the SQL Server remotely, because that's what you're going to do in a production environment. You're going to be working with SSMS on your local machine or a virtual desktop, and then from there connecting in. So let's go ahead and get these final pieces in place. First, I'm going to click Start, and I'm going to type the letter L, U, S, R, M, G, R, dot, MSC. This is the local user manager, and what we're doing is we're going to add our remote account to the local administrators group so that we can connect to SSIS. I'm going to click on groups, and then I'm going to double click on administrators. We're going to click add, and I'm going to type CBT user, click check names, hit OK, and apply. Great. That part is done. Now we need to open up the ports in the firewall. I'll click Start again and simply type Firewall. We're going to click Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. Let's create some new inbound rules. I'll click Inbound Rules, and then right over here, I'll click New Rule. We're going to be opening up this port, TCP 1433. This is for the SQL Server engine. We're going to say allow the connection, and everything else is fine. Let's call this SQL inbound, and I'll hit finish. Let's hit new rule again. We're going to choose to enable a port again. This time we're going to click UDP and click 1434. Let's hit next, and the same drill, next. We're going to call this SQL browser in, and I'll hit finish. And lastly, we need to allow traffic into SSIS. This time we're going to choose a program. I'll hit next. We're going to browse to it. This is going to be in the C drive, program files, Microsoft SQL Server. We're going to go into 130, DTS, bin. We're going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to choose MSDTS SRVR. Let's hit open. Next. Allow the connection. Domain, we're going to call this SSIS in, and hit finish. All right, now just because we've enabled it in the firewall doesn't mean SQL Server is actually listening on those ports yet. We need to go to Start. We're going to go to Microsoft SQL Server 2016, and right at the very top we're going to see SQL Server 2016 Configuration Manager. Let's go to SQL Server Network Configuration. We're going to expand this tree. We're going to click on Protocols. Let's enable TCP IP. We'll right-click and choose Enable. And it says these changes have been made, but we have to restart the service before they actually take effect. So let's go to SQL Server Services right here. We'll just expand this name out a little bit so we can see what's going on. This guy right here, this one that just says SQL Server that's running, that is the actual database engine. We need to restart that. So let's right-click and choose Restart. And just like that, it's restarted. Let's also go ahead and restart integration services at this time as well. Let's do restart. And it's restarted. At this point, we should be able to hop over to Client NUG and get connected into SQL NUG 2. Let's give it a shot. We'll paste in our password. We've got SSMS pinned to the taskbar at the bottom. We'll go ahead and launch that. First, let's just see if we can connect to the SQL NUG 2 engine. SQL-NUG 2. We'll go ahead and get connect. Looks good. We are connected to the engine here. Now let's see if we can get connected to integration services. We'll just change the server type down to integration services. We'll specify this with SQL-NUG 2 again and connect. We got an error that said the RPC server is unavailable. Let's see if we can troubleshoot this a little bit. I have run into this before and know of a couple other things we can try. We're going to hop back over to SQL-NUG 2 and see if we can figure it out. So I have run into this DCOM issue before, and what we can do to click it, or what we can do to fix it, is to click Start. Let's go back to our firewall and add one more rule. Let's go to Inbound Rules. We're going to create a new rule, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to allow the DCOM protocol in, which is on port TCP 135. Let's do next, next, next. We'll call this DCOM in. We'll click Finish. Now we've got decom in allowed. Let's hop back to Client NUG. Let's fire up this connection. We've got Integration Services, SQL NUG 2. I'll hit Connect. And there you go. We are now connected to Integration Services in SQL NUG 2. Look at that. We have installed SQL Server, put the files in a place that's going to be great for our data warehouse, enabled all the ports so that we can access the database engine and SQL Server Integration Services. What a huge nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.